Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Samuel Degelo Wash Processed Ethiopia from Madcap Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Madcap, based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and this coffee was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video where it finished first place out of 4 Madcap coffees on that day. And this coffee was a suggestion to us by Max Taylor, so shout out to and thank you to Max for the suggestion. And of course it was his suggestion that led to this entire Madcap review series, and it was long overdue given that Madcap is such an iconic and important coffee roaster to me. So the question we're going to look to answer today is whether or not this coffee maintained its status as our favorite of those 4 Madcap coffees. This right here is day 28 of this coffee. Once again brewed through the AeroPress today, and I quite like it through the AeroPress. But for the most part, the recipe we went with throughout the time of this coffee was our standard recipe, 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit, and liked this one better through the V60. And as kind of mentioned, the adjusted Madcap recipe we have from their brew guides is a 16.9:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 208 degrees Fahrenheit. V60 indicates a more medium fine grind, and Madcap is a light medium American for the roast profile. With all of those things out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. So day 6, which was that blind taste test rankings day, and I don't even know if I needed to take a sip to detect that this one was the Ethiopian on the table, because it did have a nice floral aroma to the cup itself. Of course, the first sip helped, and it definitely yielded 2 of my favorite aspects, actually 3 of my favorite aspects of coffee in general. It was clean, it was fruity, it was floral, and as a result, it left a pretty positive first impression, and unsurprisingly, it finished first among those coffees on that table. So of course, pretty positive first impression. We'll continue. Day 9 ran it through the Chemex, and it was not quite as vibrant on the peachiness this time around. Pretty strong on the clean florals, and that was a nice little positive to the cup of coffee. But with that being said, as I mentioned, both peach and rose are actually 2 of my 5 favorite flavor profiles that come in coffee in general. With that being said, I actually prefer the peachiness quite a bit to the rose, so when it was coming to this cup of coffee, I really wanted to get a lot more of the peachiness than the rosiness, so that, if I'm being nitpicky, was a slight negative, given that I was getting a lot more of the rosiness from the Chemex. One thing I also wanted to say about that, I haven't found the Chemex to be the best for most of these Madcap coffees. What I've really liked is actually the AeroPress, because every time I tried this coffee through the AeroPress, any of those 4 coffees through the AeroPress, for the most part, maybe with the exception of the Rondon, I quite like it, maybe even better than with the V60, so I think the AeroPress is really good for a lot of Madcap's coffees. But we'll continue. Day 12 adjusted to Madcap's recipe with the V60, and the rose was once again on the forefront. So I feel like the rose was just a little bit more pronounced throughout the entire duration of this coffee, as opposed to the peachiness. But with that being said, it doesn't quite feel right brewed this way either, as the recipe tends to be a little bit more diluted at the 16.9. So I do like this coffee to be a little bit more, well, concentrated, and that's why I do prefer the higher ratio, and as a result, the peachiness again is a slight bit more in the background of the finish on this day. So not my favorite on this day. We'll continue. Day 13, back through the Chemex this time with Madcap's recipe, and it wasn't quite the same from what I had experienced from that first impression, as the florals are really present and pleasant once again. The higher temperatures seem to be pushing a lot of the acidity in the cup, as well as the citrus, and I always forgot that the citrus was one of the flavor notes that they have listed on here, but I kept getting the citrus. Obviously, when I was drinking this cup of coffee, the first 2 things I was looking for were my beloved peach and my beloved rose, and I kept getting a lot of citrus. I'm like, is there supposed to be citrus in this cup? And there was, and that's another kind of nitpicky thing about this coffee, is I just really wanted those 2 traits to be by far more dominant and maybe a little less of the citrus. Day 17, best day of the coffee to this point, pretty structured and layered, as the cup mostly highlights the distinct rose off of the brew with a more citric-like aspect in the middle ground before settling into a wonderful peachy cup as it cools. I always get a lot more of the peachiness as the coffee has cooled down closer towards room temperature, so that's when I'm enjoying this coffee the best. There are slight additional attributes, including a slight candy-like sweetness and a fair bit of lively acidity. So once again, not surprising, but a theme with Madcap's coffees, there's a little bit more depth and complexity to them than with some other coffees. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. All right. 1 level 5, bunch of level 4s. Let's run through those real quick. So the cleanliness at a level 5, it is on the lower side of that level 5, but I still think it justifies the level 5 because it is a really clean cup of coffee. So of course, that's a huge selling point to me. I really love the cleanliness. If it was up to me, every single cup of coffee would be a level 5 in terms of cleanliness. So that's off to a positive start. Sweetness level 4, I always say that's kind of the minimum you need to get to for me to really enjoy a cup of coffee, so that's quite nice. And the finish level 4, that's typically where I prefer and enjoy the finish to be. Florals and stone fruit both at the level 4. I've been kind of mentioning throughout this video that this cup of coffee skews more towards the rose profile than it does towards the peach profile. So I'm definitely going to keep those florals at the level 4, and the stone fruit, while pronounced, definitely on the lower side of that level 4, and almost in equal abundance to the citrus. And the citrus is pretty pronounced in this cup of coffee, and that's why it's at a level 3. And I wanted the stone fruits to be just above it because the stone fruit was more pronounced than the citrus for me. And I didn't want them on equal footing, even if that meant as a result I'd put the stone fruit and the florals on equal footing, where the florals were definitely more pronounced in that capacity. Acidity level 3, as I've continued to mention in all of these videos, the acidity for Madcap is a little higher than I think I remember experiencing from their previous coffees, so that once again was a little bit of a surprise to me. Of course, lower on the body, not too surprising given what it is, and not sure that there's too much else worth noting in this tasting wheel. I feel like it's a pretty direct representation of what you would probably expect from a washed Ethiopian coffee. Alright, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Let me get the really boring things out of the way. Of course, it was a wash processed Ethiopia, so I very much enjoyed this coffee. It had a lot of flavor profiles that I very much enjoy from coffee, so those were great. And this one definitely was my favorite of those 4 Madcap coffees, as I felt like even though this one didn't improve as much as maybe the Kenyan had, it's definitely remained consistent enough to the point where, given how much I enjoyed it from that first day, it was just as enjoyable throughout the time in drinking this coffee. Now, let me start with the really positive thing about it. Based off these 4 coffees, I think what I said in our first ever Madcap review remains the same. I think Madcap is improving. I think a lot of these 4 coffees that I've had are better than what I remember from drinking Madcap back in the day, and that's a really nice positive given that I already had a really strong impression of Madcap going into this review series. So I would say keep up the good work with Madcap. I think that we'll continue to see their coffees just get better and better over the years, and this was a nice representation of that. Now let me be really nitpicky because it is a wash processed Ethiopian coffee and I have to be super nitpicky with Ethiopian coffees. The thing I disliked the most about this, as I've kind of been alluding to, is that the citrus was a little stronger than I was hoping for given just how much I enjoyed the other 2 flavor profiles in this cup of coffee. I don't necessarily enjoy the fact that the rosiness was more pronounced than the peachiness, as I was definitely looking for a lot more peachiness in this cup of coffee. And again, this the cleanliness kind of being a little on the lower side of that level 5. I wish those 2 flavor profiles were a little bit more refined, and I guess that's kind of on me as I was trying to really find a more refined peach and rosiness to this cup of coffee, and while they were definitely there, they weren't as sharp and direct as I was necessarily hoping for. Again, those are being super nitpicky about this, and as a result, I think this is probably my favorite wash processed Ethiopia of the year, but I don't think we've reviewed that many wash processed Ethiopias. In terms of Ethiopias in general, that Mosto processed Ethiopia from Kawa is still my favorite, and I think I do enjoy the Blind Tiger honey processed Ethiopia, the Damo, a little bit more because both of those were just a little bit more unique for what they were. With that being said, obviously a really nice cup of coffee. I enjoyed this, and I enjoyed the Madcap series, so thanks again to Max for the suggestion, but I think I will leave this review at that. After I suggest who would really enjoy this coffee, as I forgot that part, the type of person I would suggest this coffee to actually is somebody like myself. You like the cleanliness, you like the florals, you like the fruitiness, and you like the sweetness. Obviously, those are 4 huge factors for me, characteristics I really enjoy about coffee. Then this one's a pretty good fit for you. Rosiness, most pronounced characteristic to this, but you're definitely getting a lot of other aspects, some pleasant aspects, including the slight bit of stone fruit that's in it. So those are the traits. That's the type of person I would suggest this coffee to. But again, we'll leave this review at that. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Samuel Degelo Wash Processed Ethiopia from Madcap Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.